Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Bennington with the Circle of Atonement, and I'm here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we are talking about what is your real journey. This episode was inspired by a workshop on course-based prayer that Robert and I hosted recently, where we discussed two different paths we can all take in this life, the physical journey or the spiritual one. And this wasn't the main thrust of the workshop, but it received a lot of attention. Some members of our Course Companions community mentioned it, that this part had deeply affected them. And it's really shifted something inside of Robert and I as well. So we thought that we'd not only share the general idea of the two journeys that we discussed in the workshop, but that we'd use this opportunity to expand on them as well. Robert, I mentioned that the two journeys that we can choose between in this life are the physical journey and the spiritual one. So let's talk a bit more about what that means. Can you describe the journeys for us?
Yeah, I mean, the physical journey is what we think of as our lives, right? It's what the Course calls the body's serial adventures from the time of birth to dying. So you're born, you go to school, you grow up, you start relationships, you get married, you have a career, et cetera, et cetera. There's illnesses scattered through there. It's the kind of things that would make it into a short biography of your life. And it's the thing we're focused on day in, day out. We are thinking about the physical journey and wanting to make that be the absolute best that it can be. We want the good life. And so much of our spirituality basically says you've been trying to have the good life through normal means, and we're going to give you spiritual means to have the good life. So that's the physical journey. Okay. The spiritual journey is what the Course says is the real journey. And it's the journey to God that's taking place or not taking place while all those concrete biographical facts are playing out. Did we forgive? Did we express love? Did we follow guidance? Did we progress toward the goal of God? Now, that tends to be the journey we're not thinking about. But the Course says that that one, the spiritual journey, is the real one that we're on. Whether we know it or not, whether we think about it or not, that's the real journey.
Right. And in the prayer workshop, we created a diagram that explained this idea. It had a line in the middle that was the timeline of our lives. And at the top was the milestones of the physical journey that you've just described: our birth, our death, our education, our marriages, careers, and finally our death. And then underneath the line, so you have the line, then on top is the physical journey, and underneath the physical journey was the spiritual journey. This was how well we love. As you were saying, are we a presence of peace? Did we heal or harm with our thoughts and with our actions? How often do we pray and meditate? Are we on that journey towards God? Are we trying to be a genuinely kind person? And you can download a copy of that diagram at circleofa.org/podcast. Just go there and look for this episode. Which journey are you on? And you can get a copy of that diagram. Now,
I just
Robert,
want to say, I mean, it was a pretty simple diagram. It just had a big fat arrow, and on top of the arrow was the physical journey and the milestones for it. On the bottom of the arrow was the spiritual journey. But as simple as it was, I mean, we probably could have scratched it out, in the dirt, and people still would have connected with it. They really connected with it.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll pretty it up before this episode
hopefully
launches, and we'll have something more display worthy. But essentially, yeah, it was a very, very simple diagram that was just a visual representation of this idea of which journey are you on? Do you want to make your life about the acquisition of physical things, or do you want to make your life about the expression of love and that journey home towards God? Now, Robert, I mentioned that you and I were very moved and remain very moved by this idea. So what do you want to say about how the Course contrasts these two journeys and why it should matter in our lives?
Well, the course's contrast, I mean, it doesn't exactly use this language, um, but throughout it talks about the physical journey and almost like that's the distraction. That's where where the ego's focused, and the spiritual journey is what it talks about again and again, and that's what we're really on. So if you imagine that you were in a game show and you thought you were doing, you were doing one game and trying to win in that game, when in fact there was a whole other game that was the real one, and you weren't paying any attention to that. Like, what a desperate situation you'd be in. And that's how the workshop left me feeling like, okay, so we get the concept that you can be focused somewhere in one place while what's real is taking place and you're missing it. Right? There's that saying about, no man ever on his deathbed says, I wish I'd spent more time at work. Mm-hmm. So it just left me with the feeling that as much as my life personally and professionally is about this path, the journey the course is talking about, where I'm totally focused on every interaction, on every thought about other people, on my practice throughout the day, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll fill this out. That journey is still not where I would say the bulk of my focus goes, which means I'm in that game show scenario. I'm playing one game and the other one's the real one. And my attention is not going to the other one as much. And so it's a hugely consequential, personally relevant idea for each one of us.
Yeah, the course talks so much about the real world, what it describes as the real world, which is totally the opposite of the way we describe the real world here. You leave for college and your parents are like, well, you'll see how it really is in the real world. And the idea is that it's a harsh and cruel place. And in the course's definition of the real world is it's what we see when we see only with love, when we see that only loving thoughts are true. And that is what we can see when we're on the spiritual journey, when we know that what we're doing here is not just trying to make it through these physical milestones so that we can acquire things and live comfortably, but we're trying to, through our forgiveness and through our expressions of love, see only love. And when you know that's the real journey that you're on, then everything changes, doesn't it?
Yeah. And there's so many, I know we need to move on, but there are so many stories, fictional stories as well as real stories, where someone gets through life and achieves so much and realizes it didn't really add up to anything real.
Yeah. And I know we're going to get to stories just like that, but I wanted to pause here because when we talked about this in the prayer workshop, there were two things going on. One is there were students who were really moved by this idea and were kind of rocked by it the way you and I were. And then there were also students who were like, well, wait a second. Is the course not telling me to have a life of abundance or aspire to a good life? Is the course telling me to completely give up physical pleasure? And, obviously that's not the idea at all. The course isn't saying that you can't be abundant, and the course isn't saying that you can't have physical pleasure. The course is only saying, don't look to those things as the source of your true happiness because it's not there.
Right. Right. And the course even suggests in places that the Holy Spirit will supply us with the things we need and will guide us to the acquisition of the things we need, but it will be his concept of the things we need. And the things we need are those things that will not weigh down our journey because we're so attached to them and so embroiled in them. They'll be the things that allow us to travel lightly on our real journey, which is the journey to God. So the Course talks about the material end of things, but whenever it does, which is not that often, it talks about it as a side issue. And it's only important insofar as it affects the real issue, which is the journey to God. And I just think we'd all be a lot better off if we actually lived that way.
Yeah. After the workshop, when we had those questions on, is the Course trying to tell me that I shouldn't live an abundant life or have any sort of physical pleasure, I found this quote from Thomas Merton that said, "Don't look for rest in any pleasure because you are not created for pleasure. You were created for spiritual joy. And if you do not know the difference between pleasure and spiritual joy, you have not yet begun to live." So I love that quote for a ton of reasons, but it seems to cut to the heart of what it is that we're talking about here, because we think the joy is found in the physical journey, or at least that's what we're told. We go through life just trying to chase happiness, and we're told that happiness comes from getting these things. And so the primary journey that we're exposed to in this world is the physical one. And you and I have been talking about just flipping the diagram upside down so that the primary journey is the spiritual one. And of course, we have to live our lives here, but we can live them in a way where we're focused on the right things. So.
Yeah, and I mean, the Course isn't saying it's sinful to have all the stuff, all the trappings, power, fame, money, etc. It's just saying it's ineffective. It's not going to do for you what you expect it to.
So we see these two journeys reflected in near-death experiences, particularly in life reviews, where people are given a review of their lives and they have this opportunity to discover what's truly important and what isn't. We have a couple examples that we wanted to share with you. The first is from a book by Kenneth Ring. It's called Lessons from the Light. And in it, an anonymous indie ear says, "Believe me, what I had counted in life as unimportant was my salvation, and what I thought was important was nil."
Yeah, what all of us are afraid will happen one day, we'll realize we had our priorities all, upside down. Okay, another example is from a great book, and this is a man who helped start the whole NDE thing. He had his experience in the 40s, named George Ritchie, and he's like 20 years old. So he comes before Jesus, and Jesus asks him, "What have you done with your life?" And he gives it a lot of thought, and he says, "Well, I was an Eagle Scout." And Jesus responded, "That glorified you." And then Jesus said a second time, "What have you done with your life?" And as the exchange went on, it was clear that Jesus was looking for him to talk about the acts of love in his life.
There's another indie ear, Howard Storm, who in his life review said, "I got to see when my sister had a bad night one night, how I went into her bedroom and put my arms around her. Not saying anything, I just lay there with my arms around her. As it turned out, that experience was one of the biggest triumphs of my life. My life was shown in a way that I had never thought of before. All of the things that I had worked to achieve, the recognition that I had worked for in elementary school and high school and college and in my career, they meant nothing in this setting."
I mean, can you imagine? That one really hits me. First of all, he has this random experience where he just happens to respond to his sister's need, one of the great achievements in his life. And then all the things he worked so hard to achieve, recognition in school, in his career. He was an art professor. All those things he worked for years incrementally to achieve, they meant nothing.
Doesn't that just feel true? You get to the end of your life, and would you really expect God to say, congratulations on that degree, congratulations on that corner office, congratulations on your beautiful wardrobe of clothes? Of course, God would say some form of, were you a good person? Were you kind? Were you healing? Were you present to the people in your life? Were you peaceful?
I think when you think of it that way, like what God would say, it makes sense. But when I read these quotes, and we could multiply these endlessly, this is such a common experience that NDEers come away with from their life review. When I read this, I think it meant nothing. It was nil. Like, I think surely it's like, yeah, it didn't mean as much as I thought, but the it meant nothing is shocking.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
there's one last one that you wanted to share.
Yeah. So there's a video by an NDEer named Erica McKenzie, and it's unforgettable. And we played it for the prayer workshop because she's, out of her body. She's having her life review, which is being conducted by God. And she hears this old time projector start up, and it's the life of Erica McKenzie. And she's shown basically what we're calling the physical journey. And she's shown, as she puts it, the things that are valued by man. So it's all the awards, it's all the achievements that she had in that physical journey. And I'm sure there was nothing surprising about that to her. It was the things that she had worked for and focused on. And then it's came to the point at which her NDE happened and stopped. And then the projector was getting ready to start up again. And she was told by God to put on this pair of glasses, which she said were the size of a car. But as she reached for them to lift them to her eyes, they fit perfectly. So now she's wearing what she called God's glasses. And the projector starts up again. She's seeing her life all over again. Only she said, this time she's seeing it through the eyes of God, not what was valuable to man, but to God. And this time she saw a whole different life story. She saw basically the acts of love, the thoughts of love, the words of love, not the things conventionally valued, but the things that actually mattered when it was all said and done. And obviously, what is so great in this context for our purposes of that story is she was shown the two journeys, right? The physical one and the spiritual one, and made clear that when she was looking at the second journey through the God's glasses, that's what was real. That's what really mattered.
These stories are so amazing. And I know that it's probably expected at this point that when Robert and Emily are talking about a course principle, they're going to roll out some NDE examples. But they're just incredible because when you hear these stories, and believe us, these are just the tip of the iceberg. It's like again and again and again, it reinforces the very principles that the course holds dear. And that quote that I read first from the Kenneth Ring book, where the guy said, what I had counted on in life as unimportant was my salvation, and what I thought was important was nil, is so reflective of that course quote. Some of your greatest advances you have judged as failures, and some of your deepest retreats you have evaluated as success. And so I don't know
it's
if
the same idea.
It's the exact same idea. So do you want to say more about that? Because it seems so relevant here.
Well, I don't think I want to say more about that, just because it's just the course saying practically the same thing as the NDE you quoted. But there's a great story from that's not in the course. It's told by Ken Wapnick about Helen. She had lots of little snippets of guidance that I think we'll never hear about. And so Ken Wapnick tells this story, or told this story, where he says, one morning, we were leaving Helen's apartment for the medical center, and Helen had her notebook with her as she was in the midst of taking down a poem. So this is like after the course has come through, and she's still taking down poems, which are published in the Gifts of God. We were almost out the door when she stopped to express concern about not having taken with her a psychological report she was working on. And then Jesus replied to her, that is not what you will leave behind you. So she's got this job, this career, and she's got to do it, right? And her mind has to focus on it to some degree. In the meantime, parallel with that, she's taking down the words of Jesus. And when push comes to shove, he's like, well, actually, the career stuff is not what you'll leave behind you. It's the other stuff that you're embarrassed about, that you're working into the cracks.
I forget which class it was that we did for Course Companions recently, but there was this idea that what you leave behind is the love that you implanted into someone else and the change that resulted in their life as a result. Can you remind me what that was and where it is in the course?
Well, I'd written an article about the concept of creation and creativity in the course, and the article concludes with the idea that we should think of creativity not as producing something physical, but as the legacy we leave behind in the form of the healing in the minds and hearts of those we interact with. And I reported on an experience somebody had where they had been a teacher of autistic children who were severely autistic in some cases, and where it seemed like you had no effect on them at all. And this person had an experience, an inner vision, in which she saw that one of the students that she had taught, there was like this pink glow around his heart. And she was informed that that was the effect of the love she had given, and would always be with him. It would stay with him as kind of a protection. So he's not conscious, maybe, of carrying that legacy, but that's her real legacy, some unseen change deposited permanently inside someone else.
There you go. That's amazing. And that should be what we're focused on leaving behind, not the great reports that we write, like Helen's example that Jesus gave Helen, and all of the things that we seek for in our lives to pile up under our list of accomplishments. What if we really went through life and said, who have I helped today? Who have I loved today? Right. What pink oval have I left around the heart of someone today? And who puts that down on their list of New Year's resolutions? You know, how many people can I serve this year? It just seems like such a sacrifice. So anyway.
I think the closest thing we come to that in this world is motherhood, right? Mothers are just working and working for years and years. What for? Ultimately, to leave an indelible, imprint inside their children. So those
and then
children
your children become teenagers and don't listen to a darn thing that you say.
Right. I mean, the teenager thing is a wrinkle in that whole thing, but
yeah, it's all pink and beautiful while they're toddlers, and then they grow up and they're like, no thanks. Anyway, I mentioned New Year's resolutions a minute ago, and it reminded me of goals. So let's talk about the course's approach to goals, because goals are so frowned upon in spirituality sometimes, or at least they're viewed with a certain level of suspicion. It's like, to be considered truly spiritual, you have to have no goals because striving is of the ego. Right. But when it comes to like the way in which we go through our lives and what journey that we're on, the course has a different view of goals, a very positive one. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we did a workshop, I think almost 20 years ago, on the topic of goals in the course. And it was so revealing, because the course has this attitude that our conventional goals, and you can imagine this would be the case, are basically worthless. You know, we are setting these goals for achieving this and achieving that in the world. And the course sees those as I was saying earlier, ineffective, because ultimately, we're searching for something inside those goals that they will never deliver. You know, he says we're searching for permanence in the impermanent, for love where there is none, for immortality in the dream of death. We're searching for some indefinable supreme treasure in those physical things we achieve that we will never find there. So the course does not think highly of our conventional goals. However, that doesn't mean that it frowns on goal seeking. It thinks we should transfer goal-seeking behavior to the spiritual journey. So the Course talks about us going after the goals that are goals that further and get us to the supreme goal of God. And goals like seeing our brothers with true perception, goals like learning forgiveness. And so it thinks we should set those goals, formulate the means by which we achieve them, pursue them with consistency and focus, ignore the things that don't contribute to those goals. And when we stray from that focus, we then quickly recover ourselves, forgive ourselves for the straying, and get back on track. So it has an approach to goal seeking that would sit comfortably with any motivational speaker, with Tony Robbins. It's just taken that whole goal seeking and moved it from the physical journey over to the spiritual journey.
And there's the rub, because when you hear that the goal in the Course is God, it's like, oh, what? You let the arrow out of the balloon. I want something more sexy. I want something more enticing. I want something, better, I guess, than going for God. And so when you say, okay, underneath all of the searching that you're doing in your life for all of these things everywhere, there is the real you, your true self, that is searching for God. It has what the Course would call an eternal fixation on God. And
Right.
You don't know it, but it's there. And every box that you're trying to find happiness in, you're just looking for God. And
Right.
and we don't like that message. We don't want that message. That's why we reject it and search for things of this world. And so, Robert, how can we get more in touch with this desire in us for God? Because we all have it, every single one of us. How can we get in touch with that desire? And how can we make God feel like a worthy goal?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's lots and lots of ways. I think the whole path of the Course slowly gets us more and more in touch with that. I know for me, it helps just to have the Course's teaching that it's not like I really do have that desire. It's like that is the only desire I have or I've ever had while I was seeking, like you just said, while I was seeking those other things. I didn't realize I was really seeking God, just in a misguided way that was never going to work. So, from the Course's standpoint, we have that one desire, always have, always will, and we're incapable of wanting anything else. We just have to recognize the nature of the desire. Another thing that's helped me is the teaching on the pull of God. The Course says that we have this irresistible pull toward God, and that when God is in the vicinity, that pull starts to activate, and we want nothing else. And it's also helped for me to read stories of, let's say it again, near-death experiences where people experience that pull and they say, like, I wanted nothing else but to be in that light, or you cannot think apart from it. So I think just having the concept, ideally having more and more of the experience that, okay, so this is not something boring that I need to work up the desire for. This is all I'm capable of wanting, and I just haven't realized it.
What you just said about the pull of God is really interesting. Like, you get close enough to the divine and something in us activates, and it's almost like a tractor beam.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so many people feel that and reject it and turn away from it. But if you're listening to this podcast, I'm assuming that it's activated in you. And so it's just like, go with it, because that's the real journey.
Yeah.
So just moving on, because I know we don't have the full hour today. Let's talk about, so we talked about goals. Let's talk about the Course's approach to prayer and the things that we should be praying for in this life.
Well, and that was the context in which we first talked about this idea about the two journeys, because when you think about prayer, what we all think about from a conventional standpoint is you pray for the things of the physical journey. right? You pray to get the girl or get the guy. You pray to get the job. You pray to get your health. You pray to get the money. And the Course is full of prayers. We talked about there being roughly 180 prayers that we are given to say in the Course. And none of them pray for those things. And in fact, in the Song of Prayer, he discourages all that. And so what we were talking about in the prayer workshop is all of those prayers. Pray for the furtherance of the spiritual journey rather than praying for the furtherance of the physical journey. And those prayers are rich in all the things that we, in essence, ask for. But the things we ask for are gifts that further the spiritual journey.
And the furtherance of the spiritual journey is about, we talked about this in the Song of Prayer classes, it's about the interior journey, that relationship between us and God that moves us independently towards him. But so much of it is also about the interpersonal journey. We talk about this in relation to the Course all the time. It is very much an interpersonal path. You find your way to God by seeing God in everyone and loving everyone as a result. And within that,
and by walking together with them.
Yeah. And within that is the seed to the healing of our world, because the division of our world is what's destroying our world. And therefore the healing is coming together. And that's a big part of the spiritual journey as the Course describes it. So do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, there's so much that we could say about that. I know we're short on time, but when you think about, well, the spiritual journey is the real one, I think you would naturally think about the interior journey with spiritual realizations, inner breakthroughs, meditative experiences, holy instants, inner guidance, all that. And of course, from the Course's standpoint, that's a huge, huge focus in this, what we're calling the spiritual journey. However, the Course ends up sounding like those NDEers in talking about the interpersonal dimension of walking with others on the journey, sharing a common goal with them. The Course says, well, Jesus says in the Course, we start out together, like us and Jesus, but then we gather in our brothers as we continue together, our mighty companions. And the Course talks about the importance of our function, of giving miracles to others, of giving expressions of love, acts of forgiveness and generosity. That's a huge part of the spiritual journey, which is, of course, the main focus that you see in those NDEs. They talk about the acts of love being what it's all about. So we shouldn't think of this as, well, it's all those great moments I had in meditation. It is those, but it's also the interpersonal moments of sharing a common goal, of serving and expressing love to other people.
I know we have to wrap up. So let's talk about how we put this together. So if someone's listening and they're thinking, I've been on the wrong journey in this life and I want to turn that around, where do we start? And what's the next step?
Yeah, well, great question, obviously. I think that what we should know is the Course is a complete path that is essentially built to get us focused day to day on the real journey, so that's where our main focus is, even while we're keeping the lights on and all that in the physical journey. And so the Course has this picture of what we've tended to call the ideal spiritual day. And it's a picture that the Course is trying to guide us into, which you see most fully in the workbook, but it goes beyond the workbook. And the elements of that ideal day are what I've long talked about as study, practice, and extension. So you start the day with Course study, Course reading the Course as a personal wisdom guide for you. And then you spend your day doing the kind of interior discipline or practice that the workbook teaches you, where you start with a morning quiet time. You renew the state, the peace that you reached in that quiet time every hour on the hour. You practice briefly several times in between the hour. Whenever the mildest upset occurs, you use your practice to dispel that and return your mind to peace. And you conclude with an evening quiet time, just like you started the morning with. And then all of that, the study and all the practice, is meant to put you in a state of what the text calls miracle readiness. Now you're ready to give miracles, those acts of love that the NDEers were told were what it's all about. So on the platform of your study and practice, you're in a state of miracle readiness so that whenever the opportunity comes along, someone has a need. That's basically what it comes down to. You are ready to give an expression of love, give a miracle, and that's the extension. So the Course is trying to guide us into a place where each day is about the study, the practice, and the extension. And if you do all the components of that, then your focus is on the spiritual journey. No longer is the real journey like outside your priorities, outside your attention, happening without you attending to it, but it's become the main thing you're attending to. And the Course says when you do that, there are various promises that the problems and the possessions and the material supply and all the things you need for your physical journey will be dropped in your lap, which is a beautiful promise.
It is a beautiful promise. And again, I think when people hear, well, the goal is God, and your day should, according to Course practice, orient itself around that goal. And when students are confronted with the kind of day that you've just described, the study, practice, and extension, and what the workbook asks of us as students, it can get a little overwhelming until you realize that the goal of God is the goal of love. And the practice is meant to put your mind in that state of miracle readiness, where no matter what happens that is stressful or triggering within your day, your practice is the thing that is anchoring you in love, and you're responding to the events and the circumstances of your day better because of that practice. And that's what's leading you towards God. It's not just that you're doing a face plant on the floor for God every day. It's like you're in service of love, and that is what is in service of God. And it's a beautiful picture when you put it together.
It really is. And, I'm thinking of a new addition to the diagram. Like we started with, there's the big fat timeline arrow, physical journey on top, spiritual journey on bottom. And then sometime after the prayer workshop, you said, we should flip that. So the spiritual journey is on top and the physical one's on the bottom. And now I'm thinking that when we put the spiritual one on top, what happens is all the stuff we need for the physical one kind of drops down. It sort of, it falls down from the trees of the spiritual journey so that it's taken care of. We can put the physical one on the bottom, because when the spiritual one's on top, what we need for the physical one just drops from the top.
Yeah. And just one last point on that. If you're in the workbook, we're in 235 today. And a couple of days ago, we had 232. And that lesson is Be in my mind, my Father, through the day. And that prayer in that lesson walks you through a day that's very similar to the day of practice that you've just described.
Yeah.
And it's intense. And then it says, after the prayer, the Course says, this is as every day should be. And I said to you, oh my gosh, that's a full day of devotion to this path. How on earth are you going to get any work done in the middle of this? And I loved your answer, and I just want to share it here. You said that the form of our thoughts and the form of what we say can be very much oriented to the physical journey, to the things that are going on in our life that we can see with our physical senses. But the spiritual content can still be there. And so when you're at the meeting at work, when you're talking to your spouse, you're saying the things that relate to the physical journey, but in your mind, you're on the spiritual journey. Am I being a presence of love? Am I being healing? Am I being genuinely kind? And that is how we devote one of the ways that we devote our day to God.
Yeah, and just to add one little thing to that, in lesson 153, it gives us this promise that he says, in time, with practice, you will never cease to think of him, meaning God, even while you essentially are busy giving salvation to the world. Even while you're serving your brothers, your mind will still somehow be on God.
Well, that's the whole monk thing. You go to a monastery, and what the monks are trained to do is pray ceaselessly throughout the day, or labora, work and prayer. And I was telling you, we go to retreats because we're spiritual retreats, because we're trying to have that spiritual journey. We're trying to clear everything off of our calendar so that we can focus on that spiritual journey. And then we go back to our regular lives and it flips again, and we're focused on the physical journey. But we can live in a way that keeps that spiritual journey going, regardless of whether we're on retreat or not. We can live our lives that way. We can be on the spiritual journey every day. And
Yeah.
that's a beautiful thing to aspire to.
Yeah. And the course is designed that ideal day to be doable within a normal life. It takes a long time to train yourself into having that ideal day. It's a journey, not an instant accomplishment, but it's doable. And then we're living the real journey every day.
Yeah. Well, that seems like a great place to end. Robert, thank you, as always, for another wonderful discussion. If anyone would like to join us live for these podcasts, we record them every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, and you can sign up for the link at circleofa.org/events. There is no charge. It is a free offering from us here at the Circle. And so we hope that you'll sign up and join us for a future recording. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Bye for now.